And welcome to Payson City Planning Commission tonight. Thank you for being here. Um, Welcome the public. Oh, wait, there isn't any public. We have 6 commissioners here. Commissioner Becker is the missing one. Hopefully she comes in a minute. We're going to have Commissioner Frisbee give us an invocation.
Our Father in heaven, we are grateful for the opportunity we have to come and meet to discuss the matters for our city. And we pray that as we discuss the issues on the agenda, that we will be able to take into account our current and future desires for the way we want to see Payson to grow, and that we'll be able to do it in a manner which will make it good for the citizens in the city as well. And we're grateful for the opportunity to live in a country where we have the opportunity to participate and to influence the way our government is run, and we pray that will be with us to be able to make those decisions which will be best for everyone. And we are grateful for the servicemen and women and those who put their life on the line to protect us each day. And we pray that will bless them and their families. And we pray for this in the name of our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Commissioner Frisbee. So we're to item 3, the consent agenda. There's one item listed on the consent agenda. It's the minutes from our last meeting, June 11th. Did everybody have a chance to review those? Any issues, comments, or clarifications? I need a motion to approve.
I move we approve the minutes from our previous meeting.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? All in favor with yes?
Yes.
Any opposed? Okay, good. Public forum, nobody's online, right, Marty? Okay. That will be done with that then. We're going to do a little work session now, and Jill's going to do that instead of Michael. And so Jill says that she could talk a lot about the code, but she wants Michael involved with it more. So we may only do one section tonight. I hope that doesn't offend anybody that we only do one section tonight. So we're doing commercial and industrial development, which was 3.18 or 13.18, excuse me. Did you get your mic up, Ryan? Okay. Everybody else is say Payson on it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it takes a minute for it to boot.
Hear me correct? Okay. So Michael said, well, we've got a couple of things going on. As you had mentioned, Appendix A has been given out. Hopefully you guys will have a chance to review that. We can discuss that at future meetings. We talked a little bit about, how we can tackle that. We are going to talk about commercial industrial development tonight. So chapter 13.18. I think it's a fairly lengthy, so I think we can have a really good discussion about it. Hopefully we can get through it. We can move on to the next section. If all of a sudden, if we find that we get through this really quickly and you're like, oh, okay, let's do 15, 20 more minutes, just to bust out another chapter, we can do that. But I think there'll be enough to discuss with commercial industrial development. So a couple of things. That a couple of points that I might have to go back and forth. Michael did make a couple of notes that he wanted me to bring up, but so if I juggle back and forth, we can. Okay, so I know that this is in like section number 4, but I'm going to explain to you a little bit about how we do the site or how the site plan process works. The approval process is listed in here, but I think it'd be good to start with that. Commercial and industrial development is approved administratively by staff. That is something that Payson has done for many, many years. We definitely weren't the first city to do administrative approval, but in our immediate area, we were one of the first cities that actually went to an administrative process without it having to go to planning commission and city council. So I'm pretty proud of that. I think a lot of communities have gone to that now, even before state law changes. But we did that as streamlining the process, because when it comes to commercial industrial development, whether it's employment or if it's retail, if it's sales tax dollars, anything with economic development, we wanted to streamline that. We wanted to make sure that that got through the process quickly so we could see the benefits of that commercial industrial development. So when you get further down, it talks a little bit about it being administrative. We only require planning commission and or city council review and approval if there are potentially significant impacts on infrastructure, traffic, and those are listed there, and we'll go over those when we get to that section. But yeah, I don't know I cannot think of off the top of my head any project that we did deem to have significant impact and brought it to this body or to the city council. But it's a good section to have in your code, because there are going to be those times where we might have a pretty intense use that we feel needs that additional level of review, or consider, or comment. So purpose intent, again, is the approval process to talk about design, talk about compatibility, talk about how these development sites are processed and how they are approved. But it is to, to improve commercial and industrial properties. Relationships to other sections. So, and you've probably heard this in past discussions, or you will hear them in future discussions, but you've got the zoning code, you've got the subdivision code, but then we have things like development agreements, or we might have, sometimes you'll hear that it's part of a redevelopment agency area, or it's part of the business park, or so depending on where a project is in the community, there might be some additional documents that govern the use of that property, or the construction or the operation of that property. So we have those listed here. We just want to make sure it's sort of a catch-all, that if somebody's coming in and they want to develop a site, that they have everything that they need in this section or in this chapter. It's just like, okay, you might be coming in and asking for approval of a site plan, but did you know that, it may happen to be in the business park, and so there's some additional guidelines and requirements that are required in the business park. So it's just more as, one, a reminder for staff, two, reminder for the land use authority. In this case, the land use authority is staff because it's administrative. And then also to provide guidance to the applicant that, at least they can ask the question is, oh, am I in an economic development area? Or, oh, I'm on historic Main Street. So there might be some additional regulations that apply in that particular area of the community. So I don't foresee any changes in that particular area, except for, and I'm going to pull it up on the screen because Michael's put a lot of time into this. He's keeping all of your notes, as you can see here. With all these discussions, he is taking notes of all of these conversations and the things that you would like us to consider with this code rewrite. So he's been doing a fantastic job. But there's a couple that he would like, as he's administering the code, he's ran across. And so he's put that here that number 5 should potentially be project development and annexation agreements, because it's not always just development agreements. Sometimes when we're
Yeah.
the
Most
majority of the time
Most
when
of the
we
time.
are annexing property, that comes with an annexation agreement, that's going to provide guidance of how that property is used. And then he's suggesting add number 7 and number 8. Number 7 would be Payson City design requirements, and we'll talk about that a little bit more tonight. And then number 8 would be specific area plans. A lot of times those come with the annexation agreement, but where they are a specific document and it is defined in code, he's specifically putting specific area plans. So I think those are some great additions.
I had one question on that.
yes.
Redevelopment areas, doesn't the state call those things different now? Aren't there a bunch of different names for that?
Yes.
And do we need to include those in this list, or is that enough of a reminder? Because there
Uh,
are different kinds of redevelopment areas.
We should use the correct terms and a reference to Utah code. Yes, so that would be a great addition.
Yeah, because they change that and they keep changing it and
You're talking like opportunity zones, or what are you?
Yeah, you have opportunity zones or,
Yeah.
I think
it's something with
the
a C
actual,
in it. What's the
what a
one with a C in
redevelopment
it?
agency used to be, I think is a CRA now. I
Yes,
think it's a community,
redevelopment
redevelopment
area.
area.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
yeah. So instead of an economic or just a redevelopment area, but we ought to reference that, whatever the state code calls them these days, we ought to reference that.
Right. No, great catch. Yes, we will definitely,
So.
put that down. Moving on to approval process, I gave you a high level, what the approval process is, but, going to applicability. So just so there's no question, we put in their applicability that if you're doing one of these things, then it's going to trigger the site plan process because it's not always new construction. That's an easy one. You know, if somebody's coming in, it's a vacant piece of land and they want to build on it, they come in, they submit a site plan and we go through the process. But if it's an existing building, how do you address an existing building? How do you address an existing building that's been vacant for 15 years? You know, it's there, it has access to utilities, but it's possibly deteriorated over 15 years because it hasn't been utilized. How do you address increased intensity? So maybe a building's been used as a commercial use, but the intensity has changed. So it was um,
A non-public warehouse.
it
for
was
example.
a retail space that changed to a car wash. I mean, that, you know, that's not gonna happen a lot. But if the intensity changes and the impact that it could have on utilities and infrastructure, that would trigger. Also the example of a building being vacant for a long period of time, we actually have that in the ordinance also, that if it's been vacant for a certain number of years, that they have to come through the process. So
It's just 1 year. Is that,
I think it may be 1 year.
it is, that's what it says, is just 1 year.
Yeah.
In excess of 1
That's-
year.
Yeah.
Is that
Um,
too short?
it, it might be too short, but I don't know. The situations that we've ran into, they've actually been much longer.
They've been
than a
much
year.
longer, yes.
Um, we could talk about that one and see if 1 year is too. Yeah, I'm thinking even the little commercial building that's up here on First South and the highway,
Yeah,
the dentist's office. It's
Right.
probably been close to a year
Yeah.
that it's been vacant, you know, and it would trigger the full site plan process. And I don't know if it would necessarily need to be if it was a similar use.
if it was a similar use,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So the timing, you know, it's one of those things of, you know, is it 1 year or is it 5 years or is it 15? You know, but we just want to be able to have the ability to look at the site and require enhancements and upgrades if necessary.
Yeah, make sure you turn that on.
Wasn't working a minute ago. But I mean, it would have a lot to do with how the building's maintained while it's sitting. I mean, if it's just turned dilapidated, then you would have more. But if somebody's still maintaining the building, we would have less to worry
Right.
about.
Right. And maybe there's some flexibility in there that as determined by, you know, whatever that may be. Because let's say it's only been vacant for 3 years, but the property has been maintained. You know, then maybe there's not a need, if a similar use is going in there. So, no, great points. Again, change of use or intensity. Change of use would be, like residential going to commercial or, a warehouse going to a school, something like that. So you got change of use and then you got change of intensity because sometimes it still may be a commercial use, but the intensity increases. A site that contains an existing structure that has been vacant, anyway, that's one that you just mentioned, and then any significant change proposed after site plan approval has been granted by the land use authority. And in a lot of cases, that's sometimes just an amended amended site plan instead of going through the entire process. I don't know if there's anything else that, so any construction activities not in conformance. Okay, and this is where you get into there, if roadway improvements need to be completed, landscaping, utility upgrades, access delineation. Accommodation of stormwater, that's one that we run into, especially with existing buildings all the time, because when they were built, there wasn't a stormwater requirement.
Well, and the stormwater requirements change too,
They do.
big time.
They do. Yeah. Well, and some of the sections of code, well, most codes are written because something happened. There was an example or something that happened that you want to avoid in the future. And, and stormwater was actually one of the examples of why we put in, the change of use requirements. And I think even the 1 year, is we had,
Well, and
we had a
the
site that
flood, the
was
FEMA
drained.
flood map changed.
What's up?
The FEMA flood map changed.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that could have
Mhm.
triggered something here.
Yeah.
So,
No, absolutely. But we want to make sure, yeah, that, we're getting that site, that we're bringing that site closer into compliance. We know with existing development, you're not always going to comply. There's going to be some things that are always non-conforming. But if we can bring it in closer into compliance or limit any negative impact that it might have on adjacent properties, that's the goal. We also have here, there are mixed reviews on deferral agreements. So I think that's something we're going to discuss as part of this code rewrite. Because this section here is just the city council may choose to defer those improvements or in that agreement, put an improvement schedule in there. And we've had to do this a few times and it's actually worked well because there's been some businesses that have wanted to expand the operation or they've wanted to do an expansion to the building. They don't have curb gutter and sidewalk or their power is still overhead and it needs to be underground. And then that's a big shock to them. I mean, they come in, they're like, we're going to get our building permit. We're going to add on this 20 feet to our building. We're going to be able to operate our business. And then we say, well, you got to put that overhead power underground or you got curb gutter and sidewalk in. And it could be a large expense that they weren't planning on. And so there have been times that we have put in place a deferral agreement to say, you are still responsible for those improvements. However, we're going to work with you in order for those improvements to be completed over time. So the idea of it is very much of a partnership in order to get that done. The challenge we have with deferral agreements is tracking them and then getting the work completed. And so that's a little bit of a challenge because, once you get that approval granted and you got that addition done, everyone forgets about the curb.
you tie a bond to them?
That's gonna be my question.
We don't currently. That could
Every
be,
other city does.
but that could be, something that incentivizes them.
Every other city does.
But in some cases, depending on the cost of it, well, I guess
A
they could
bond
get
doesn't cost as
well,
much as the,
Well, if they're doing like a letter of credit or something
Right.
like that. Yeah, a cash bond would be, okay, I'll just go get the improvement done.
all right.
But, maybe a letter of credit or something like that would give them the ability to delay it, but still have some assurance for the city that the improvements are going to be done. Yeah, no, we'll take note of that too, because I think there's mixed reviews internally as staff. There's some that is like, we want to get deferral agreements out of our code. It is just kicking the can. It's just kicking the can down the road and it's going to get lost
But
and it's
sometimes,
never going to get done. But then there are times that it's nice to have that option in the ordinance because every situation is just a little unique. And it's nice to be able to have that ability to say, we will work with you.
I mean, say you got a property that's adjacent to an existing road and there's a, a future planned road on another plane of that property. You don't want to put the road in to go nowhere. So you defer it until development happens. That makes sense.
Right. Right. Yeah. And in most cases, it is a situation like that. I mean, council just recently approved a deferral agreement for that exact example out on the west side. Quality Carports, that big blue industrial building that's out by the truck route. They don't have the full width of the road on their property. They don't even own it, the other part, but they are improving what they can and then deferring some other improvements that cannot be done until the adjacent owner participates. So it is a good tool, but there is always that concern of, will we ever call on it?
It should be the
And will we
exception, not
ever
the
get
rule.
and maybe it is more of the exception of the rule instead of the easy way out.
Yeah. Instead of
For lack of
always,
a better-
instead of always saying, oh, you can defer it.
Yeah.
You say, prove to me that you really do need to defer it. And if you can justify it, then we'll consider it.
Right.
Well, from a business standpoint, I mean, sometimes it's like you said, cost prohibitive. If I got to put power underground and do a curb gutter, everything, you're like, oh, I want to put $100,000 or 100,000 into expanding the building, but it's going to be 50,000 to do the utilities.
Right.
That's huge. And so you're like, hey, if I can put that out over 5 or 10 years, it's doable. But if I'm doing it up front, then you're like, I can't even expand my building. So I
Right.
think we got to take that into consideration. How much, yeah. And maybe you base it off of the project cost. Well, up to 15% of the project cost or 10% can be done immediately. And then anything beyond that, we can defer to where
Yep.
if it's $1 million project, then we can expect 100,000 in improvements. If it's a 10 million project, we can expect 1 million improvements. But if it's 100,000, then we can say, well, we're going to only expect 10,000 up front.
Right.
I don't know, something that would make it more manageable from a business side.
Well, plus if they show an intent to try to do what Ryan's saying, then we can take them at their word that we can defer it. But if they don't show any willingness at all to do even like the minimal stuff, then really they are hoping that we forget,
Right.
and that word would get out. Oh, well, you just defer it. They're not going to remember. And that's not a nice precedent to set either.
That's not, developers never do that, do they, Bob?
Only on Tuesdays.
The problem is the developer sells it to somebody else and then it just gets
Right.
lost in the sauce because, well, we sold the
Yeah.
project to the next person.
Yep.
And so if you don't have it in writing somewhere, then it doesn't follow the project anyway.
The deferral agreements are recorded.
Right.
Right.
It's just,
It goes with the land.
and it goes with the land. I think one of the ways it gets lost is that when it's an existing building, when somebody comes in to get a building permit for an addition, or if they're getting a business license or something like that, we're not asking for a title report.
No.
Now, we ask for a title report when somebody is like doing new construction. I mean, that's just part of the application process. They have to
Right.
submit a title report so we can see what's been recorded on the property. If there's agreements or encumbrances or some type of lien or something on there, we make sure that those are addressed. But we're not requiring that for just an addition or for a change in business, like a new, change of business license. And maybe we need to be requiring that, but it's just it's an additional step, it's additional cost to get a title report. But that would solve it, because then you would see right on the title report that there's a deferral agreement that was recorded on such and such day, and you would look at it and then, so there's some things administratively that, maybe we could change a little bit to, or maybe it's just a quick review on Utah County. Because for the last 30 years, you can go online, and you
And
see
you can
most
get most
everything that's
everything you need,
recorded.
yeah.
I mean, going much further than that, sometimes you have to go over to the county building and research it, but maybe it's even just
Is there a
scan
sunset
of-
clause in this?
Mm-mm.
So for example, you give them a deferral, is there
Typically, we usually don't put like a year. We don't say, okay, in 5 years. We will usually just have trigger points. It'll be, when you go to do an addition to your building, it triggers those improvements. Or when the property owner next to you builds their portion of the road, it triggers it. We usually just put actions that would require it, not necessarily years, because
And
sometimes
what
you just
about
don't know
if,
when it will
it's
happen.
been 10 years, do you terminate it
No.
and say, you just keep it? Okay.
Yeah, we
I
just
was
keep
making
it. I mean, we have a section in the deferral agreement that says that the city can call on it at any time. We just have to give them notice, like 90 days notice. But that could be overwhelming too. It's just like, oh, but now the next property owner is doing their improvement. You're giving me 90 days. I can't find the money in 90 days to do my part. So it's a catch-22. You just prefer to require it up front and get it up front. But there's situations where it is just not feasible. And so you have to work with them. So,
Okay.
and our new city attorney may want to see some changes to that deferral agreement. He may look at the structure of it and the content and may say, I think we might need to change a few of these things. So it may end up just being more administrative, but
Okay.
my opinion is I think having the ability to defer is helpful to have in the code, but it should be the
I
exception.
think it's a
not the rule.
valuable tool, but it needs to be not used on every case.
Right. Okay,
I think we
complete.
beat that one to death.
Yes, complete. Well, and actually it sort of takes care of another section in the code. So it was a great discussion because the actual regulations for deferral and what's in it is actually in another section. So it's good to
Okay,
have this conversation because it'll make that conversation a little shorter. Complete application and review fees, that's self-explanatory, what we're requiring there. Submission of a business statement. So we require with each site plan, we want to make sure that we fully understand what the applicant is wanting to use the property or the building for. And sometimes that gets lost in conversation. It's just always nice to have a business statement that they come in and they say, okay, we want to do X business, which involves this type of operation. We're going to have X number of employees. We only have day shift. Whatever else it is. Doesn't mean that their business operation can't change in the future. But having that business statement helps with initially when the site is built, we're making sure there's adequate parking. We're making sure there's proper ingress and egress, whatever it may be. But then over time also, because there could be eventually a change of use or a change of intensity of the business, and it may not work on that site or in that zone anymore. Because you'll notice that in Appendix A, when you start looking at some of the types of businesses, it's like, well, I think those could actually be combined. Well, sometimes it's just because there's a little different intensity. So you want them listed separately. And there could be a time that you may have to use the business statement for an enforcement purpose. You came in, this is the type of business that you said was going to be there. It's allowed in the zone there, but now you've changed it to this and it's not allowed. Either you need to remedy that or we need to work with you to find a different location or whatever it may be. But it's just really good to make sure everyone's on the same page with the business operations.
Okay.
Administrative site plan review, we talked about that one. That's done at a staff level. And then here, and actually when I was skimming through this chapter before this meeting, I noticed that we talk a lot. I mean, there's like 3 different sections that talk about the significant impact on, when it can go to the city council. And so we're going to want to combine those. We don't need to lengthen the ordinance. We can condense a little bit, but any project determined by staff likely to have a significant impact on traffic, environmental quality, lighting, compatible uses, health, safety, general welfare could be submitted to the Planning Commission, City Council for review. I think on this section, we're going to have to define what significant is. And I know Michael has talked to, I mean, with other sections of the code, as you've been discussing this, there's going to be a few things we're going to have to make sure are defined from a legal perspective of what's significant to one is not.
Lawyers
significant to
typically like that
another.
word because then they can argue it in court, what it means. A definition would be a good thing.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah, significant or, compatible and, there's a few of them that we use all over our ordinance that probably make an attorney cringe, but anyway. But it's not the intention of staff that we would bring everything to the planning commission, city council, but there could be that time that we feel that,
And
Even
maybe it's
just-
triggered by, instead of just a single thing, but a whole plan or a number of acres or how many buildings, or maybe that is how you define it. If we're talking a campus with 12 buildings, that's significant.
Mhm. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. And I think most of the time it comes down to the use, sometimes it's not the building,
Yeah.
it's the use that goes in it.
Yeah.
And a lot of times with a commercial, no, not necessarily with commercial, but industrial development especially, you don't know who that user is until that building's built. They come in and they say, we're gonna do this concrete tilt-up building, 100,000 square feet, and it could accommodate one user or it could accommodate 10 users.
Mhm.
We just don't know. We build it to support multiple. And then we don't know who the user is for a year or two or whatever. And yeah, and it could potentially be create a lot of traffic or a draw on utilities. We run into that a lot with this office warehouse space. So.
Question in there. It says that the public hearing is at the city council level. Is that correct? Because I know we've moved a lot of the public hearings to the planning commission level. I just didn't know in that case if it would be at the city council level or if it would be moved to the planning commission, because I know a lot of the stuff we're hearing now and they don't hold public hearings on it.
This requirement for public hearing, it would be from our code, not
Okay.
Utah code. And Utah code is specific with like planning commission. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't care either way. I just didn't know if it was inconsistent with what we had or.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, they're the final authority on it. It's just,
Right.
do you add the public hearing to their meeting and have them hold it and then make the decision? Or
Yeah.
do you have the public hearing and then make a recommendation from planning commission? I just wasn't sure because like I said, I know most of the public hearings now have
Yeah.
moved planning commission only. We used to have two of them. It was
Right.
dumb because we'd have planning commission and city council. And now it's like, no, we just have a planning commission and then the city council just reviews
Right.
that. So I just didn't know if make it consistent with all the other public hearings or,
Consistency always makes it easier for staff.
yeah.
Just because then we don't have to remember, oh, well, does
you
this
don't have
one
to
go to
remember
council or
which
this
rule
one
is
goes to planning
which.
commission? It just, but in the case of a business that would have that impact on traffic or environment or utilities
I suggest.
think
we
that
leave
should
it with the city
elevate?
Council.
To the city council.
That would be my suggestion.
Because we're already saying that staff is the land use authority on this.
Yep.
And we feel uncomfortable with providing the approval because of these things. Should it go to the legislative body?
Right.
No,
Which
great
they're
question.
ultimately the,
Great question.
yeah.
I mean, I do like the consistency of just saying planning commission, but in that case, if it's something we're concerned about that may not be approved, it could potentially be litigated. And I wonder if you would want the legislative body to make the deciding, vote on that. I don't know, but we can write that down. I mean, we could get Brandon's recommendation on that too. It's like, okay, in this
That might be the best way to
scenario
go.
Yeah.
See what
is
Brandon says.
maybe it would be different than the other public hearings.
Yep.
So, no, great question. And then here we sort of repeat that we're processing administratively. But there are some processes that may coincide with site plan that will not be processed administratively. And one is subdivision well, subdivision of land. That's changed in state code. And so that's either done at, it was actually really done at the staff level when it comes to commercial and industrial property. So Michael is recommending that we actually strike that one from this. And then again, this just repeats, or actually a little bit further explains what that previous paragraph was. So we just need to combine that. And I would actually say that we even need to expand it to, define what significant is, and then provide a little bit more guidance for that approving board of findings. So, anything else on
No.
Planning Commission, City Council? It's not going to happen very often. I can't think of an instance where it has, but something to fall back on. Development agreement. We don't generally do development agreements for commercial development. We have, but it's not common. It's not common. But
Again, it depends on the use and
Yeah.
what they're asking for and what you promise as to whether you need that.
And we also have another chapter in our code that is about development agreements. I don't even think we need this section in or under commercial and industrial development because it's
We
addressed
have a development
elsewhere.
agreement code.
Yes,
Oh, there we go.
in Title 13, there is a chapter that addresses development agreements. And maybe it's under supplemental but there is one that's called development agreements. And instead of putting it in each section, residential zones, commercial, industrial, I think we just need one chapter that says the city has the authority
To ask for
under
development.
state law, because
Ask
state
and
law will
require
allow
a
it,
development agreement,
and we can for
whatever.
these different types of development, and it's just in one place in the code instead of multiple places. Because that's when we get into trouble with, we find loopholes or there's clarification issues, so. Anyway, okay. But we can take note of that and that will take care of the section that talks about development agreements. So development improvements, is very wordy. This code's sort of written more of like a story. It's like, oh, well, we need to, the nature of commercial industrial development creates a situation. Anyway, that is not code.
No,
And so, I
That's-
mean, that sounds like it should be in
that sounds like AI
the
wrote it.
guidelines. But anyway, so we can reduce a lot of things there, but basically is what this section is saying. Because we have Title 13, which is our zoning code, and then we have Title 12, which is our subdivision ordinance. Well, most of our development regulations are in the subdivision code,
Right.
or they're in the development guidelines. So they're in other documents. And as what we found before we added this section years ago was people would come in and they're like, okay, well, I don't have to do that because it's not in this code. It's like, well, no, it's in the subdivision code. Well, I'm not subdividing property, so I am not, I'm not required to meet those regulations because I'm not subdividing. So we wanted a cross-reference here to say, okay, you may be doing a site plan and you may not be subdividing property, but you are still required to address public infrastructure and storm drain and block requirements and roads and streets, drainage
Yep.
and storm sewers, water facilities, sewer. I mean, and in most cases, they have to have those things in order to build this building and to utilize the building. But we wanted to make sure that it was very clear that even though that they are in a different document or different chapter of our title, that's known as subdivision development regulations,
Right.
you still have to follow those requirements. And there'll be even some changes with those as well when we amend
Need to,
the subdivision
the,
code.
the main thing is to make sure that this matches the sections that it's referencing.
Yes.
That's the biggest thing.
This is kind of unrelated, but it's just something that I've seen in comments that people make just on the Payson Facebook page. Sometimes they ask, where we're making all these changes to the roads and stuff like that, just that there are a lot of parts of our city that don't have curb and gutter. And is there anything that we can offer to suggest, just as Payson continues to improve, about satisfying those concerns from the citizens and communities that have been here, and we'll call older part of town or
Right.
whatever, right?
Right. There was a survey, some of you may have even participated on it a few years ago. Actually, we've done a couple of different community surveys just to get a feel of what the residents want to see, or business owners want to see. And I'm going to get the years wrong, so I'm just going to say the first one, when we did that, we said, okay, of all these projects, what is your highest priority? What would you be willing to pay for? I mean, just to start to narrow it down. So we narrowed it down to maybe like 6 projects or something like that. And of course, curb gutter community, sidewalk in the community, was on that list. Well, then we narrowed it down based on that list, and we said, okay, well, we know we can't do 6 of them, we can't afford 6 of them, so let's, the top ones, let's put out another survey. So a couple years ago, we did another survey, and the interesting thing about the survey is you could pretty much go in and just say, okay, what had the most support for this? Or there was a lot of different angles that you could go in and say, but curb gutter and sidewalk in the community, I mean, no matter what way you looked at this survey, curb gutter and sidewalk was always the first or second. And then, some of you may recall a new city center was on one of them, and maybe a public safety bill. Anyway, there's just, a library, because library's been a big thing in the community as well. Anyway, yes, so you're hearing, we're hearing it too here at City Hall, is exactly what you're reading on Facebook, is people want to see that in the community. We have looked into that. We've had studies done to provide costs or guidance of how we could tackle that from a community-wide perspective, because you can't have the whole city torn up at the same time. Plus, we couldn't afford it, or what the cost estimate would be. Well, with all cost estimates, it just keeps on going up and up and up. It's probably at one of the highest priorities, but just haven't found funding for it. But along with, but with this new construction, like if somebody's building a new home on a infill lot in the center of town, they're required to put curb gutter and sidewalk in. Well, their neighbors may not have it. There's sometimes, well, you guys may recall there was a subdivision that was approved on 400 North and 400 East in Payson. I believe that came to you. That property owner, as part of his subdivision, was required to do that corner lot. And then the city looked at it and said, okay, there's only 2 other parcels to get all the way to get the rest of the block done. So then the city contributed, and now we're doing the last 2 parcels to get the whole thing done. So I think there's a lot of different things, but years ago, we used to incentivize curb gutter and sidewalk for those parcels that have an existing home but don't have curb gutter and sidewalk. That ordinance was repealed a couple of years ago. We have not replaced it with anything. I think the intention was we'll repeal what's there now, but staff will come back with another suggestion of how we could partner with landowners to get it done. It's just gonna be too challenging for the city to pay for it on their own. But if there's a way that we can incentivize it and work with landowners to maybe get it done, or maybe through a special improvement district, have a whole block get done. I think there's some tools out there. It just has not been revisited by the city council as far as what needs to be implemented, but it's talked about often with the city council. They see the need and they see the benefit. It's just how do we tackle it, or is there multiple ways of addressing it, or is it just bonding, which the city gets concerned about with bonding. I mean, we've had to bond for the sewer plant upgrade and bond for some of the power facilities that we're putting in. And so it's really just trying to find a way to stretch the dollar, but it is a high priority to the community. And I think it's a high priority to the city council too. It's just coming up with the best way to take a bite of the elephant.
Well, and then that's another example of kicking the can down the road. So,
Right.
I mean, if we keep kicking the can down the road, then
Yeah.
it won't ever get done. So,
Well, and that's some of the debate with the deferral agreements, because there has been cases where somebody has come in and they wanted to build a home on a lot. And then they've requested a development agreement or a deferral agreement to not do the curb and sidewalk because their neighbors don't have it. So there's part of that challenge too, that it's like, okay, well, if the neighbors don't have it, then all it's doing is shifting water and then creating a problem on two lots now. And yeah, and
yeah.
there has been some deferral agreements that have been granted when maybe we should have just required the improvement because you have to start somewhere. But no, thanks for bringing that up. It is something we need to talk internally and make sure that we're continuing to explore options and opportunities to
There
get.
are methods
Yeah.
to do it. It takes a commitment from both the city and the council.
Yeah.
To do so.
Well, and then I know I'll be ready to leave planning commission once we put something in the bowl down there by Stadium Cinemas, because I know my wife razzes me all the time. She's like, you're really not doing anything because there's still nothing in the bowl. So until that space camp, whatever gets there, and I guess, once Front Runner comes down to Payson, I guess I can consider that at least haven't been on long enough to do it. But for the time that we spend,
It
You
will,
know.
it will happen.
It will
It-
happen, and it'll happen sooner than you think.
oh, so we're saying like 2034, the week of the Olympics, when the Savior lights the torch. All right, that's fine. That's great. I'll kick that can down to 2034.
It's coming.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. All right.
Coming.
Well, and we always knew that that was gonna be a long-term project, that it was gonna take many years.
Well, and I appreciate when somebody makes a comment on Facebook like that at least kind of speaks to something that they've always said that they want to see, as opposed to asking for another Mexican restaurant or a Texas Roadhouse or something here that, is something that one or two people ask for, right? But I mean, back to Ryan's prayers, when we pray to help improve our city, it's not because like we don't have anything better to do on a Wednesday night on the second and fourth Wednesdays. We want to at least be able to say when we were here that we watched something get approved, or sorry, moved on to the city council. Because it was something that we could wholeheartedly support. So I appreciate your discussion on that.
Well, and I think too, I mean, this code rewrite, I mean, is going to be very impactful for our community. So I know that we're taking a lot of your time and having all these discussions, but what a great experience for a planning commission to be able to go through section by section and discuss the code like this to then make change.
Well, Jill, the other thing
It's
too
very
is
impactful.
what's also humbling is when somebody goes to Google something for Payson and then they see our names as being something that we passed, moved on. And then we get a text out of the blue saying, okay, something dwelling units. I saw your name on something. And I'm like, uh-huh, yeah. And so that's a hot topic. I'm like, uh-huh, yeah. And so at least we put our names to it. And that's why we stayed for the record when we approve or send something back to staff to reevaluate.
Yeah. And community development takes a long time and it will be generations but you're doing your part, and the things that you are putting in place today, you may not see for 20 years. I look at that with my career and I see, just even the discussions we're having with Front Runner, for example. I remember when that was just sort of a line on a map of saying, Payson to Pleasant View, and now we're planning the area around it, and it takes a lot of time, but it took a lot of people and commissioners and council members to support that and make sure that you just continue to say, we want that for our community in the future. We see the benefit of expanded transportation in our community. Yes, there will be change. There'll be change with that. And some change is good and some change is hard to see. But it just takes that consistency and that vision, and and these codes are going to help, because it's where the rubber meets the road. I mean, you have your general plan and you have your vision and those things, but the code is what is going to determine whether or not it happens, or if we miss the opportunity. So anyway, so and then also there's supplemental also. I mean, you have those specific sections in the subdivision ordinance, but there's also sensitive lands. I mean, we have wetlands in our area, we have waterways that go through Payson. So there might be some additional requirements for sensitive lands. Development guidelines is more of our engineering standards and construction documents. So we definitely want a reference to that. If there's trails that are anticipated or adjacent to this development, we want to make sure that we're getting those sections of trails built, because trails are not just in residential areas, mostly, but there is some connections to commercial. We also reference that there might be other agencies that may have jurisdiction over an application. If an applicant's coming in and they want to get access on a UDOT maintained, owned and maintained facility, they've got to go to UDOT and they've got to get the approvals. And then just generalized, I know we talk about UDOT specifically, but in the next one, we also have private utility providers in our community. We have irrigation companies. Some uses are going to require health department approval, so on and so forth. So it's just that remember the checklist that you've got to get through all of these in order to get your approvals or your final approval from the city. There might be other agencies that have to review it. And then again here, we could require, or on arterial or collector roads, we could limit access, the amount of access points on that. Mostly in Payson, it's UDOT facilities. It's a highway that goes through, but we do have some arterial and collector roads that are owned by the city that we may determine that need to have some limited access. Primary building required. So we do require that if someone is operating a business in Payson, that they have a building on the site. So we had to put some specific requirements in there, except for there are some uses in the Appendix A, which you will see that you're like, well, you can't put a building there for, a train stop or a bus terminal, some utilities, corridors. But in most cases, industrial and commercial is going to require that you have a primary building on the site. Doesn't necessarily say how big it has to be, because some businesses will only need a little area, a little office, and a restroom. But so saying my connection's unstable, so hopefully there's no problem there. But except for those utilities that are listed. So design guidelines or design elements, we have several things here. We talk about purpose and intent. We talk about site planning. And I'm not going to go paragraph by paragraph, but there's certain things that we look at from a site planning standpoint. We're looking bigger pictures, like, okay, how does this fit into the bigger picture? Someone might be only worried about their four corners of their parcel, but how does that fit into the overall development? Or how does that transition to a neighborhood or another use? We talk about parking and circulation, building architecture, landscaping, accessory design elements. So again, a lot of words that can be condensed to still appropriately address the intent, but it probably doesn't need to be that wordy. But anyway, so here again with site planning, you're looking at the area, the character of the area or the development pattern in the area. And, if that building is placed there, is that going to prevent a road from going forward in the future? Or is there a need for cross connection access between parking lots so people don't have to go out on the road to then turn into the next site? We want to make sure there's cross connection and different things like that. Site characteristics, that's where we're looking at. Are there some historical structures that are on the site that should be preserved? Or is there a waterway, or is there vegetation or something that we want to protect? And you can't in all cases, but there should be some consideration of it. You know, I mean, if there's a dilapidated, building that someone could consider historic, doesn't necessarily mean we need to save it. But if there's an opportunity to utilize that structure in the project, we want to at least have that discussion. And then again, like parks and trails, if there's happens to be a city park in the area, let's orient the development in a way that becomes an amenity not only to the neighborhood, but also as an amenity for the commercial development. I think a really good example of that is North Park in Spanish Fork over by Costco. North Park was there for even before that development came in. Just the way that they laid out that with the trail system, with the park, it's a great amenity for the community. Some people still, drive there for that, but it is a great amenity for that commercial development. If somebody was wanting to, go to the park, enjoy the park, go get a bite to eat, and then leave. It's just a really nice amenity for that commercial development. Land use transition. This one's a little longer. So we require that, and we've ran into this over the years. Whenever you're changing one from one zone to the next, there should be some consideration of placement of buildings or orientation of those buildings on either side of that so we don't have conflict. Probably the most impactful would probably be residential to industrial. I mean, you could also have it with commercial. I mean, all of a sudden you could have a restaurant next to that or a fast food restaurant and they've got the squawk box that's right there, and the poor neighbors get to, well, we have that over like by McDonald's, for example. You're going through McDonald's, and McDonald's was there and designed that way before the residential came into the West. But man, the poor people and maybe they don't hear it as much as I would think they would, but they have those menu boards and people are ordering there all the time, and you wonder how much of that actually comes into their home. But we want to make sure that we're looking at both sides of the fence. So if a commercial user is or an industrial user is coming in and they're adjacent to a residential zone, if they're within a certain distance, we want to see a land use plan or transition plan. How are you orienting that building or the parking or the landscaping, whatever? How are we improving that site to have the least amount of impact on the residential as possible? And sometimes it could just be distance. We saw a little bit of that with Farr's Ice Cream. Some would suggest that, or Jimmy John's now, some would suggest that we didn't get that far enough away from the residential, but we required the wall, the precast wall there. We required some vegetation to try to allow those uses to coexist, but not have any negative impacts. But anyway, that's what this section is about. We tried to look at various scenarios, whether it's residential to industrial or industrial to commercial or commercial to, but really the whole gist of this section is if your parcel is adjacent to another zoning district, you have to provide a land use plan. So we are deliberately looking at how is that use or the development of that site going to impact the adjacent zone. So this is something that has expanded over the years. We used to just have one paragraph and we ran into a couple of problems with that. So we've expanded on it. We've implemented it a few times. It's actually worked well. We probably will find that we still need to massage it a little bit, but those situations do come up, and we want to make sure that there is that separation. Well, and in some cases you don't want separation, but residential to industrial, you definitely want the separation between the two uses. I don't know if any of you have looked at that at all to see if you have any concerns with any of the distances or any of the suggested methods to address that. But does anybody have any thoughts on separation of land uses? Has anybody seen an issue in our community or somewhere else that you're like, okay, we want to definitely avoid that?
Well, we've had the discussions before about instead of an abrupt transition, it's a more tiered transition as in height or type or whatever. That is, you start maybe a residential and then you go to a smaller office and then an industrial type zone. And so we've talked before about that, and this kind of addresses that, but that's,
Mhm.
we want to continue that, I think.
We actually, before these changes that you see now, or the adopted text that you see now, in the S1 zone, which is the special highway service zone, which is the area around the interchanges, we saw a concern, and when you're familiar with the property, because it's where the Spring Creek Landing building's going behind Jimmy John's, there was a concern with the residential there even years ago.
Right.
And having a transition. So at the time, the S1 zone did say, if you are within 200 feet or something like that, all you could have was office. So you couldn't like put a movie theater right in the back of, or even a restaurant right in the back of those residential. That's since been changed. But to address the issue all those years ago, that was one of the, it's like, well, we could see residential, office, and then more intense commercial uses. So at the time, that's what was supported. Now we've changed it to say they need to provide recommendations of how they're going to implement, because every use is a little different.
Right.
Like a hotel, that's been discussed on that property in the past, is these residential that are maybe 2-story at most, and then you have a 5-story
Hotel.
hotel next to it, and the impacts that could have. And so sometimes there's a combination, sometimes it's even what uses you allow in the zone or the distance within the zone as it transitions. And so I really feel like the land use transition is really, really important as part of the application process.
Well, and I like the way this one's written because it gives us a lot of leeway. It doesn't say anything specific, so we can adapt it. It just says it has to be considered. Hey, if you're going from this to this, you have to consider a transition. And then, like I said, they bring it to us. We say, no, that's not sufficient, or yeah, that's great, or whatever. So
Right.
I thought that section actually worked out well just because it left it open for some negotiation when they submit the plan.
Right.
It doesn't
Yeah.
specifically say you have to
Right.
do this.
Because like I said, each one's different. What if it's, the Jimmy John's one's different than one behind Walmart, which is different than one behind McDonald's, which is different. So
Yeah, because some of
Yeah.
them, hard fast rule doesn't work, for all
No.
situations. But then sometimes, the gray helps, but then sometimes the gray makes it more challenging too. But we'll see what the legal department says when we make, when we propose, some of these changes.
You
So.
make Brandon read all this?
We haven't, we're still discussing the best way to approach the code rewrite from some other communities have hired an attorney
Right.
to actually write their code. Other cities have hired like a planner, and then they just have the city legal department review it to make sure it's legally sound. We're still weighing the best way to approach that, because planners bring a view of providing some opportunities for creating, just having better neighborhoods. It shouldn't all just be,
Right.
point A to point B. Sometimes you got to have a little bit of that gray, but then it's got to be defensible.
My vote would be the planners and have the legal review it.
And then
That would
have
be
the
my
Yes.
vote.
That'll be cheaper
I,
than having an
I,
attorney do it.
I have worked with too many attorneys over the years that I just like to throttle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'll go back to, it'll be cheaper.
I just look at it too. It's like, man, if we could find a duo, it's
If
like
you could find
put out the RFP
Wait,
and you
A
could
legal
find.
planner?
we used to have the planner that was an attorney, and now
Well, yes. No, well, absolutely.
Yes.
When Daniel was here.
Yes.
Yeah. He was a planner and.
And
he-
had a law
he had
degree,
law
and so
degree,
it was.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll find that when we put it out for.
Can you hire Daniel?
Yeah, so it's Well, he does work for a consulting firm and he might be interested. Anyway. Yeah, I did get a call from Daniel, but anyway, yeah, but we may find that situation that, you know, or somebody that's an attorney but has a land use background.
Right.
Because even that would be,
A land use attorney would be better
Yeah.
than um, a litigator, for
Yeah.
example.
yeah. We've actually talked to two that are land use attorneys, you know, that one is doing the code rewrite for American Fork.
Oh, okay.
And very impressed with her. And then we talked to another one that we've actually worked with her before, and yeah, I mean, we're gonna find a good either team or individual that does it. It's just
good.
yeah, it's a big task to take on. But building placement, I don't know how much of this we've really followed the black and white of it for the fact that well, in some cases we have. You may have noticed on 800 South, some of the areas the buildings are front door forward, and we wanted them closer to the street. Well, for example, Jones Paint and Glass.
Right.
You know, we knew in that particular area, we knew that the Red Bridge Station development was coming in. It was going to be mixed use. It was going to create more of this downtown feel. And even though Jones Paint and Glass is not part of that particular development, we wanted to set that tone coming off of the freeway. So we asked them to bring their building forward because they could have come in and said, well, we're going to push our building back to the back by the railroad tracks, you know, have our warehouse in the back. We're going to put the parking lot in front. Like, let's bring that up. Let's put your parking on the side and in the back. And let's start to create that view of going into where Red Bridge Station and MTech and everything is located. So yeah, so building placement is really important, and we have some scenarios in here of, you know, making sure that the parking lots are in the right location. If there's bay doors because there's a warehouse thing, that those are back behind where it doesn't change the look and feel of a commercial area. Or you don't have blank walls because there might have to be a reason that there is a blank wall because of the function of the
Right.
building, but we don't necessarily want that blank wall on, you know, where it's seen from the general public. So building placement is important, but we've listed several things there that we would want the applicant to consider and that we could use as a tool in order to make sure that we get that building in the correct location. Still recognizing that it's got to function for them. You know, they've got to be able to have parking in the right area to get patrons in and out. But in most cases, as we've implemented that, it's been able to work. But you may also notice along 8 South, there's been a few that have come in that don't follow that same line. And there were some circumstances for that. So anyway, you know, if there are large developments, you know, if there could be open space incorporated, or again, orientation of the building to existing open space should be considered. So that's sort of a repeat of above, but. And then we once again talk about developments in relation to non-motorized trails, and that's just referring to the Trails Master Plan. If we show a trail adjacent to your development or your parcel, we want to work with them in order to make sure that we're getting that trail connection in so we can connect the city trail system. I am really taking a lot of time. I apologize. Parking and circulation. I'm going to skip over this one a little bit because we have a whole other chapter. Well, it was 13.10. Did you guys already talk about parking with Michael? Or is that one that he has skipped over because
I
it's
don't
gonna
think we
take
went
a
over
little
parking.
bit-
We've
okay,
done the zones,
okay,
the residential, we
okay.
have done the off-street parking.
So I am going to skip over parking and
Well,
circulation.
we talked about it in conjunction with some of the other, but not that
Yeah.
section. We
Not
were
that
talking about it
section.
in the residential and stuff. but
Right. We didn't talk about the parking section.
Yeah.
We talked
specifically.
about it in the residential zones as we were talking about multifamily and
Yeah.
stuff, the parking that was there, but not the
Oh,
13.10.
yes. Okay.
I
I am gonna skip over this one because I think we need to talk about that when we're talking about the off-street parking chapter itself.
They need to be consistent with each other, definitely. I
Yeah.
agree.
So anyway, so we're gonna, but you know, like in commercial development, and that's why it's a little bit more expansive in this one because again, commercial is even in different than industrial, but like I mentioned before, like cross connections, shared parking, there's possibilities for shared parking, drop off locations, flow of traffic, different things like that. So, I mean, it is a good page in our code, just on the off-street parking here. Patron accommodation, that's when you talk about, access points, drive aisles versus parking, versus, the need for directional signs for people to navigate through a parking lot, but delivery vehicles, we talk about just making sure that whenever possible, is not always possible, but if you can find, well, first identify the route for the delivery vehicles, and if they could be a different route than the patrons, that's ideal. For example, Walmart, it's big, it's a lot different than all of our smaller commercial, but they have a separate entrance for their trucks that go to the back of the building that goes to the unloading and loading area. But some of the smaller businesses are a little different, but if there's any possibility to have those delivery trucks or the service vehicles in another area, we want to incorporate that. Pedestrian bicycle circulation. Sometimes it's hard with some of our commercial developments because they happen parcel by parcel instead of as a big collective unit. But we want to make sure that there are pedestrian bicycle facilities, that there are pedestrian crossings when they're appropriate, trail crossings where they're appropriate, or even having bike racks within the development to encourage, bicycle transportation instead of just vehicular. And then we talk about ADA, complying with ADA, which the specifics of that is in chapter 13.10. Service storage and solid waste facilities. So we have a section here that talks about your loading, your trash containers, your storage areas, your utility cabinets, your utility meters. They can't always be in the back of the building. There's times they're on the side, or sometimes something creeps into the front. But again, it's specifically listed, so there is some thought put into where those facilities are located, because there has been some times that it's like, oh, didn't think about that, and then options are limited. Well, even for grease bins for restaurants, we've ran into that before, that there wasn't foresight on where those would be placed. And we have one very popular restaurant in the city where it's just out there in front of one of the other commercial units of the building, and it's unfortunate that it has to be right there in front. They're ugly. It gets on the ground. It's smelly. It's, so again, it's a reminder to remember we've got to think about those details that may not come until the end of construction. Where are those facilities being located? We talk about this is probably one to point out, the service yards. If somebody's having a service yard with those ancillary uses there, and it happens to be near a residential area, we do require that it be separated by a concrete or block wall. So it's not just a chain link fence or something like that. It's got to be something substantial. Garbage containers, we have a lot of requirements on garbage containers and where they'd be placed, how they're screened. They have to be in an enclosure. I don't know if there's anything with trash containers that has raised an eyebrow for you, but we do require that they be constructed out of masonry materials. We do require that there be some sort of gate. A lot of times those gates get left open for convenience, but we try to screen them We know they're a necessary, portion of the project, but, try to get those where they're most appropriate and as least impactful as possible. Adequate loading spaces for, docks, that's probably more for industrial areas than anything, but, we do request that with industrial users, where are where's your loading and unloading docks or your areas? Talk about delivery vehicles with refrigerators and how long they can be there so they don't become a nuisance. Outdoor storage. So, talk about outdoor storage, the need for outdoor storage, and at what point it would need to be behind a site obscuring fence. I don't know. I'm just scrolling a little bit to see utility equipment and mechanical appurtenances. So your backup generators, your, heating and ventilation equipment, emergency generators, different things like that. We want to know upfront where those are going to be to see if there's any way they can be placed where they're not as visible. Again, necessary, but let's try to screen them. Building architecture. I'm going to leave, I'm going to skip over this one, but I want you to think about, because we'll talk about building design in the future. We do have some design guidelines in the city that, are quite outdated. Design's a little tricky. Some people think we should regulate design, to have good development, and there's some that believe that that's, government overreaching. I think there's good arguments, on both sides. But we would like to talk a little bit more about how you feel about requiring design, in the community. We don't necessarily want to infringe on branding. We have these businesses that come in and they've got a color scheme and they've got a brand that, that people recognize, and we don't necessarily want to change their brand, but we also want to make sure that, we have quality development, attractive development, no blank walls, different things like that. So just be thinking about, even as you're driving through Payson or as you're driving through other communities, and just pay attention to design in commercial industrial areas. And because we'd really like to have a good conversation about, where the city is in that design requirement. What's a benefit to the community where we don't want to overreach, but, we also want to have good development. And we see it in all other, you see it even with Walmart. Walmart is different, like in every community, and some, have a lot of enhanced features, and some are really basic and, still are successful businesses. But yeah, why they build, this design in this community versus this community is because the community is requiring it. And is design important? So anyway, so we'll skip over that.
Park City forces people to change their color schemes, so we should be able to too, right?
Yeah.
I actually don't like it. I hate driving through Park City because I'm like, I can't find anything because it's all muted and just blends together. I'm like, it drives me nuts.
Yeah. Yeah.
But-
There's got to be color.
We could make everything here Payson green.
Yes.
Yeah.
That'd be lovely.
Yeah. We have to be color.
Little overkill.
And with our current design guidelines, there are so many new products, like exterior
Yes.
building products, that aren't even contemplated in our current guidelines.
Mhm.
And,
They're rather outdated.
there's been a few times that staff's like, okay, that's not allowed, but it looks good. It's gonna be a nice product. So we've, sort of, fudged a little bit, to make it work. And we're finding ourselves having to do that quite a bit. And so we know that we need to update our guidelines, but we want to have a really good feel of what this body and the council wants to see from a design standpoint. We don't want to go down the wrong road. So if we can get a good feel of how you feel about that in the community, we would really appreciate that direction. Landscaping. This is another long section of this code, but making sure, especially in commercial areas, you don't see as much landscaping in industrial areas. We still want to have that streetscape, and we really want to have a nice feel in the industrial zones or the entry of the building, but not so much. I mean, we in industrial areas, you really want to maximize, I guess the building space, in the industrial areas, but commercial areas are a little different. I mean, you anticipate or you expect that there's going to be landscaping in commercial areas. But anyway, so we provide some guidelines in here of what the typical landscaping standards are to make sure that we're getting attractive landscaping in the commercial areas. And sometimes it's even used as, it's not even just about appearance or aesthetics, it's about delineation of drive aisles or access points, or making sure that you're not having any conflict with parking stalls, someone backing out of a parking, like a hair, we call them hairpin turns. So landscaping can be used for function too. And so that's some of the things that are outlined in here. And then perimeter, and then so that you've got your perimeter and your internal project. So actually, when you read through it, or if you have read through it, you know that there's like tiers with landscaping. You're looking at perimeter, you're looking at internal, and then you're looking like in the parking lots. So that's how we have it structured in there. Now, we may want to talk about how many trees we require. These are not the right numbers there. When you start to apply how many trees are required based on the square footage, we'd have a forest on some of these commercial parcels. So this section really needs to be what the minimum requirement is. We want a minimum requirement because there are times that people come in and they don't want to do anything. All they want to do is put gravel in. Don't necessarily want just gravel. You got to have some vegetation. You got to have some color. You've got to, but you have to have at least a starting point. But one tree for every 400 square feet puts a lot of trees and shrubs on a small site. So anyway, or even a large site, because it's based on square footage. But we do say, oh, it's 1 to 400, but if you do larger caliper trees, we can do 1 to 600, but even 600 I think is off. So we've had to play with that a little bit. I don't know if we have a recommendation for you at this time, but anyway, the goal is landscaping, attractive landscaping, and good coverage, but not planting something that's just going to have to be torn out in 2 years, because of the conflict, with the root systems or visibility, clear view, whatever it may be.
I think at the airport, and they had all those nice trees lining right where the drop-off zone is, and then now they're all gone. And you can still see I guess, actually recently they just refilled those areas with concrete now, but yeah.
Yeah, so we've seen areas where that's happened, and we don't want a requirement that's just gonna, that somebody is gonna have to tear it out in the future. It's just, if we can avoid that, we want those trees planted, and we want them to mature, and we want them to be there for 100 years. But okay. Parking lot landscaping, we're not going to go over that because I think that's a parking issue. Accessory design elements, and we don't see a lot of this because we haven't had a lot of large commercial developments in Payson yet. But your outdoor furniture, lighting, trellises, raised planters, benches, newspaper racks aren't even really a thing anymore. They were when we
The 7 that are left in the
They were
state.
when we created this code. That shows how dated this code is. What's that?
Yes.
Oh, telephone.
Telephone booth, yeah, that's a good one.
That
So
is
yeah,
great.
when we get a front runner, let's make sure that we have one newspaper rack and then one telephone right there. Yeah, rotary.
Yeah.
Let's make sure it's a rotary phone, and a telephone
No,
booth.
it could be a push button, but it still
No,
has
you're
to be
just gonna
ported.
set that phone down
Well,
and see if somebody asks what it is.
That's right. Yeah.
So anyway, no, that's great. Sometimes we apply this code so much that it's just like, oh, okay, we've got to look for project furniture, but we don't read the text. This is funny, the telephone booth.
Yeah, it comes up in F again too. And I had made a note of that. I'm like, can we just prohibit newspaper
boxes,
Yeah.
because I don't know that we need those anymore.
But, you know, back in the day, I mean, it did become I mean, when you had all the different newspaper,
Oh,
you
it's
know,
fine.
that
I'm
was-
just gonna steal a Daily Universe one from campus at BYU and we'll just put it down there by front runner and that'll count as that newspaper.
Well, you would see them,
rack
they'd be
thing.
blocking entryways or they'd be blocking sidewalks and
Mhm.
stuff like that. And so it's just something that's changed over time. But anyway, that's funny. I'm gonna point that out to Michael. So, walls and fences we talk about. Generally in commercial zones, you're not going to see fences. But there is some guidance here that if fencing, or especially if you're, you know, separating between uses with the land use transition and things like that, but I would think that this would be more for industrial. Project lighting, they have to provide a lighting plan. We want to make sure that there's ample lighting for patrons or storage areas without having light pollution on adjacent properties. So having directional lighting that guides the project on the project or the light on the project site. Some of this is for enforcement, you know, it's in there as a, you know, it's like they may address it at site plan, but if there is light pollution that we can go and say, you know, the ordinance does require directional lighting. Flags, lights, and other advertising devices. I don't think, well, one, flags, I don't think we need to address, but other advertising devices probably need to be in the sign code, not in this section. It probably needs to be under the sign ordinance. Addressing is probably addressed either in the building or the fire code. Probably don't even need it in here. Again, newspaper, real estate,
Mhm.
trade leaflets, and similar distribution racks. Anyway, so a lot of this outdated, it could change. We'll review it to see if anything's relevant and needs to stay in there, but everything else will go. So just everything's gone digital. Everything's, I mean, yeah, it's just,
It's a one line item. Newspaper racks and other displayed cases are prohibited.
yeah.
So-
There you go. Black and white.
Yeah.
There's still people that want newspapers.
There is.
Yes.
We can prohibit the racks being all over the place.
Yeah.
They can find somewhere else to get them.
And then sometimes you're trying to find a newspaper and you can't find it, you know, but
You used to have to go buy 4 editions of the Sunday paper to
We-
get the
we
coupons.
just
and
have
be
to
like,
put-
we're gonna go.
We just have to put them
Find a
out the
box
day
and buy a
after
bunch of 'em.
Thanksgiving for the people,
Yeah,
or the
for-
day before Thanksgiving,
for Black
for the ones
Friday.
that want to do Black Friday. But I mean, the majority of that you've already seen online the week before anyway.
This next section is about performance guarantee, so bonding. That is addressed in other sections of the code. Again, having it addressed in more than one section just provides for the opportunity for inconsistent regulations if you change one section but forget to do the other. So our suggestion would be we need to remove this from this section because it's addressed in another section of the code.
And then just say, see section X.
Yeah, and maybe a cross-reference would be helpful instead of just
Instead,
totally
instead of
eliminating.
rewriting it or.
Maybe it's for bonding, refer to section.
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, see that, you don't want to cut it out of here because you
Yeah.
still want them to know that bonding's required.
Yeah.
Something there. yeah.
And then
But-
it's an easy connection to the right location in the
Right.
code instead of them
Yep.
having to go back or come over here and scroll
Yeah,
and figure out.
have it a
which-
hyperlink that they
yeah,
can just hit and go right
and
there.
get to that section of the code. Yeah, that is, would be very helpful. And then appeal procedures. An applicant or person aggrieved by the application process under this chapter shall appeal the decision to the city council within 14 days of the decision.
And I'm glad it says city council, not us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't want to talk to them.
So, anyway, anything else that you've noticed with, I actually kept you here a half hour longer than I thought I would. Anything else with site plan, commercial development, anything you've heard from an applicant or someone in the community that it's like, oh, I really wish the city would look at this or city would stay out of this. But is there anything
Well, there's-
with some of the development that's happening that's concerning or even something that you've seen that you like, that we want to make sure that that remains in this code.
There's always the whiners, and it doesn't matter what you do, that there's always going to be the whiners. And sometimes you just have to say thank you and move on. So I've heard some of that, but it's the whiners.
Oh.
So
Yeah.
I have no issue with a site plan or approval for a commercial. I think it's a good deal. It's no different than a subdivision where you've got to develop roads and infrastructure that makes sense. This is a commercial area that you've got to develop that makes sense, that has common sense to it. So,
And I honestly think that section is pretty well written. I mean, it covers a lot of things and
Yep.
still leaves a lot of latitude. I didn't have a whole lot of issues with what was in there. I think I mean, like I said, there's a few little things to brush up, but I think it's actually a pretty well
There's some
written
wording,
section. Yes.
But yeah,
So,
you could throw it into AI and see what happened.
yeah.
But that's always entertaining. It's really entertaining to take an existing document and throw it into AI. Sometimes it comes out just comical.
it'd be 3 times as long because it would be eloquent and like verbose. It'd be like-
But sometimes you wonder what I mean, if you were to put all the, and I don't know if this can happen with AI, I'm not an AI expert, but I wonder if you could put all these regulations in and say, design a building based on this. I wonder what that building would look
Oh,
like.
it could come up with something.
I wonder if it'd be ugly though. You know, I wonder if, you know,
It would,
Yeah.
it would come up with
Yeah, it
something.
would.
Appropriately placed though.
Yes.
yeah.
It would,
Right,
It would either
25
be,
trees
it
and
would
I
either
might not
be
even know what to tell them.
really ugly or
Let's
totally
make it
impractical.
I know, right?
No, you talked about a lot of trees. I had to put 10 trees on a half-acre lot in Spanish Fork to meet their zoning requirements.
Oh.
It was ridiculous. And like 85 something shrub. I mean, their landscaping requirements in Spanish Fork are atrocious. I was like, are you kidding me? This is
Yeah.
what you're expecting on, and it wasn't even off of like ours excludes parking in the building. Theirs was, you have a half-acre lot. This is how many you have based off the lot size, not off of what's covered. So
Yeah. Yeah, and we do it just based off of
Yeah.
what the
big,
the
yeah.
irrigable acre area.
Yeah, and I had a
It-
retention pond out back and they didn't care. They're like, you still do it off the entire lot size, even though you've got 2/10 of an acre that's a retention pond in the back. And I still had to put that many trees and everything else. And it was,
Yeah, as we
nightmare.
applied this, and how we've been applying it, which we need to change the code to say it, but is we've just been getting recommendation from their landscape architect. You know, if they don't meet the number of the code, then we have them provide us information of why it can't be. And most of the time it's because when those trees mature, they're going to kill each other, you know, because of the competition. And there's just not gonna be enough room for the root systems, or it's impacting underground utilities or something like that. And that's what we're basing our decision on, to actually apply the code differently. But we're still, it's not just like, oh, okay, you don't want to do it. Let's just, we're having some justification of why they can't meet that requirement. So that could be another way that we just look at it with the code. But some community out there has probably figured it out, and we just need to find that community and then
Right.
copy their ordinance.
the challenge there is though, as a small business owner, it was cheaper for me just to go comply with their standards than to try to hire a landscape
Well,
architect
that's true.
and
Yeah,
say, oh, well, we could do it this way because I'm going to pay him $5,000 or I'm going to pay 10 grand in landscaping or extra trees. I might as well just pay for the extra trees, and it becomes a challenge. But
yeah, it comes back to what's the intent? You know, the intent is just we want to have some attractive landscaping. Yeah.
Make it not just an asphalt jungle.
Yep.
Anything else, Jill, on that? Okay. Let's go to
I've
commission
taken up time.
reports, or comments. Commissioner Adams, anything? Commissioner Brincroft,
I think so.
Gedepor? No. Commissioner Frisbee
that would be a no.
and Commissioner Hamuli.
no.
And I'm gonna say nothing else either, so. Staff, you need to report anything else? Oh, and we don't have any upcoming training coming up? Or do you know? What about our annual trainings we've got to do?
Well, we
To
probably
meet state code.
we probably need to look at our list.
I'll
Marty
look at
does,
it.
she tracks that. She
Okay.
tracks that to make sure, because you get an hour for being here, so many meetings in the
Right.
year. And then we do Planning Commission 101, which Michael helped, I mean, we did Planning Commission 101, what was it, May?
We've done
Or
some.
April? Was it April?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's already got some credit there. We'll just look and see.
Open and public meetings.
How many more? Yeah. Well, and we talked about having Brandon come, but
We did, and that's why I'm bringing
so
it
did
up.
we with Planning Commission?
Yeah,
Okay,
Yes.
okay. Cause I know that we did with City
plan on
Council.
having that done.
we
Oh,
need to
but
do,
we
it.
haven't
Sure,
with Planning
we
Commission yet.
haven't.
Okay.
We
that's
haven't
what-
done that one yet.
Correct. Okay, sorry, I misunderstood.
Yeah,
I knew we had it with City Council. But I think.
I can
we
bring a
wanted-
certificate that I've already done it. I can sleep through it, can't I?
No.
Yes, you can. I'll run that meeting.
And then
Sure,
we'll have
you
the regional training that usually gets us like 2 or 3 hours too.
Well, if you have,
Right.
if you have the certificate, then you have to teach it.
I could teach it. Yes, I could.
But yes, I think we're just waiting for Brandon. He just replaced the prosecutor.
That was who was here
position.
tonight.
That's who was here tonight. And so Brandon
He's-
will be able to breathe here.
He
and-
can move a little bit better.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, so this summer, I mean,
Okay.
well, it is summer, but maybe August, we'll have Brandon come in and do the open and public meetings. And I think then you might have your hours, actually.
Okay.
But I have not heard from any other, there has not been a city that has volunteered. to
Volunteered yet.
host the South County Planning Commission training.
Who's left?
Well, Salem, Mapleton, Utah County, Elk Ridge, we wouldn't expect them to do it. Maybe
No.
they would partner with somebody else, but.
Salem and Elk Ridge might go together.
Yeah, but nobody has volunteered yet. And so I think it's
Good.
been a great thing, you
It,
know,
it,
and,
it's worthwhile to meet other planning commissioners. It really is. So
you know,
that's a
and
good thing.
I don't
So-
know, I can go to Dave and he'll give me a little bit more money in the budget. We can host again. But anyway, but hopefully there'll be another community, for the commissioners that, may have not participated in that yet. In state law, it's required that planning commissioners have 3 or 4 hours of training a year. And some of it can be by attendance at meetings and some of it has to be other specific training that's outlined in state code. And one of the ways that we have done that is because it's a requirement of all cities, the South County cities just decided, well, let's do it all together. Let's just have a city host every year and you invite the planning commissions of all those communities.
Right.
And we have speakers or people come and provide training.
And they feed you food too.
And I think it's been great. I mean, Spanish Fork
I've
started
enjoyed
it
'em.
off. And
I've
then
enjoyed 'em.
Payson did it and Springville. And
Santaquin.
Santaquin, or Santaquin did before Springville. Yeah, so the 4 cities have done it. And I think everybody's really enjoyed it because then and then plus there's not a lot of time to really mingle with the other cities and everybody always sits at this, their own city tables. But, the goal was let's, get planning commissioners
I
among the
intermingled
cities
with
to,
some other cities. So
to network and.
Question and answer forum, so at least you're
Right.
hearing.
You're hearing other cities' questions and
Well,
concerns.
and then sometimes it's good to hear that it's not just us that's going through it.
Right.
It's, every community is experiencing growth and having to deal with affordable housing and transportation congestion and different things like that. And, hopefully we're learning things from each other.
Well, once we had that training the first time, it was fun to come to planning commission the very next time because you heard the terms that were discussed, not in my backyard and stuff like that. And you just, it all came full circle to me to just be like, oh, okay, I guess this didn't get reviewed during my interview to get on the commission. Because that was very helpful. And then to see other communities' involvement was also heartwarming to me.
Yeah, there's a lot to, well, and we hear a lot. Well, Spanish Fort doesn't make us do that. application process. You know, and sometimes another community doesn't, but, you know, we talk among communities quite a bit. I mean, as planners, we do. You know, we get together often and we have
Right.
conversations and we use each other as resources and bounce ideas off of. And, you know, I think that was the intent even with the planning commission is, you know, let's get you know, for people to get to know each other and have conversations and understand what they're going through and you know, as a larger city to like Elkridge, you know, we can help them with
Right.
that. Or, you know, Springville to Payson, you know, it's maybe they've been through it and they can give us some good advice. And so I think it's a good thing and I hope it continues. We'll just see if one of those other cities will volunteer. So anyway,
Okay,
but we'll give you a report on the hours.
all right, sounds good. I guess we need one more motion.
I did it last night.
Fine, motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
I'll
Yes.
second.
Yes.
Yes.
Seconded and yes.
Frisbee.
Frisbee.
Thank you.
Camry, thank you for doing it last time, so you can do it next time.
So Marty has to change it up every time.
Can't leave it.